So what I thought I'd like to do is go over some of the ideas we've worked through, give you my kind of general approach to starting a shot. So my sort of top 10 when starting a shot in no particular order really. Number one is always, identify what it is you need to roto, and really is it necessary to do the hand roto, or are there other techniques you can use? So remembering back to our list, doing nothing at all is obviously the easiest. Then comes pulling keys, creating procedural mats, semi-automated roto, manual roto, followed by paint. What can we do with keys and mats before we even, break out any of these shapes here? Now, number two is always track first, roto later. If you can effectively track multiple elements simultaneously, then do it. So we can try and set up multiple tracks here. For example, we'll bring this one here for the plant. And bring this one in here for the plant as well. See if we've got a much better match going on. Yeah, red looks good. Bit of blur and sharpen, bit of denoise as well, just to help us out. So if we can track multiple things, let's see if we can do anything with that beetle. Yeah, the beetle has that nice little splotch there on its back. Which could be quite cool to track. So if we can track all of these simultaneously, then that's going to save us a little bit of time. We don't have to apply all these tracks to the same place. And in fact, in this case here, we then really do have to come back, and especially when the beetle goes a little bit mad, we can come back and only fix one track at a time. So that can be a bit of a time saver for you. Now when it comes to tracking, I really can't overestimate the importance of getting a good track. A good track is there to help stabilize the camera up so that it makes the rest of the work a whole lot easier. I mean, if you can track nothing else except something that will help to stabilize the camera, then do that, because even that is going to help you out a whole load. What you don't want to be doing is you don't want to be trying to fight both the movement of an object and the movement of the camera simultaneously, because that does make your life a whole lot more trickier. If you can get a good camera stabilization, the next stage along there is to think about whether you can get a good sort of core track as well. So let's start a new session here. This is our, let's edit session bed, and come on, let's come in and start a new session. And we'll call this human 001. Not only could we get a good track to stabilize out the camera, we can also get a good track to sort of help stabilize out the girl herself. So here we can create what I like to call a core track. So something. So if I just come in here, change these settings up to add paint. Yes. Yeah, cool. So if we have a look at her motion here, her core movement is coming from here. This is the core area. So everything else kind of moves around here, around this midsection here. So if we could track this would be our core track, because what's happening from then on is that this is moving independently, the legs are then moving, and then just break it out in that sort of articulated motion that we did with the legs walking to begin with. So we stabilize the core element here, and that makes the the rest of the animation that we have to roto that much easier. So yeah, so getting that core element track there, that's the second stage. The third stage is, if at all possible, is to try and track the articulated element. So for example, let's come back into our roto node here, create a new layer. I'll call this one, what should we call this one? We'll call this one leg. Come into our tracker. Actually, let's not come into our tracker. Let's do a little X-spline here on the leg. Now come into our tracker, come to the planar tracker here. Check out if any of the tracks are giving us, or if any of the channels are giving us something a little bit extra. Blue's looking pretty good. So doing a track on an individual element, in this case, let's stop that there. That's working up to a point. So you can see that was working up to a point there and then stopped working. But hopefully you get the idea. So we can use trackers to also help us to do the distortion here. You know, thinking back to the previous exercise, that's where bringing in some of the trackers from other applications can also help. But this little thing here, this also shows us another issue. Bad trackers are worse than no trackers, because at least with no track, you know what to look for. You can start to hand animate things and look for the points of motion. If you have a bad tracker that's kind of skipping around just all over the place, like it is here, you end up having to do a whole lot more work trying to fix the problems created by the tracker, rather than being smart about things and doing an animation as you would do normally. So in a case of bad trackers, just seriously don't be afraid to come in and delete a whole host of tracking information. And if your tracking just isn't working at all, ditch the whole lot and just hand animate it. It may seem like that's going to take a slightly longer time, but actually you're going to save time in the long run. So number 3 is track and shape data should be kept separately. So work with groups here and apply tracking data to the group. So we do have that distance. If things start going quite badly wrong, we can happily ditch the tracking data that's on the group here, and not have affected the shape data on our individual shapes. Number 4 takes us back to the same theme. Work on a stabilized plate. Whether you've stabilized that plate to take out the camera motion, or whether you've been more successful and managed to get a good core element track, work on a stabilized plate if at all possible. Because that is where you're going to be adding, and the fewer keyframes you can add, the smaller the risk is for actually adding too many shapes and having a bubbling, boiling mat going on here, which is not only is it very ugly, it's also very noticeable and breaks the illusion that you're trying to create. Which comes on to number 5. Create the minimum number of shapes possible with the minimum number of points possible that you need to get a good rotor. And all of this comes down to a bit of forward planning and actually analysing your shot, playing your shot through, rock and rolling it a few times here, just to see where the complicated areas are going to be, and just to analyse where you're going to have to break stuff down. In at number 6 is animate following natural movement. There is a train of thought which says, start at the beginning and work every 10 frames. If it's not working, go back in, add another keyframe every 5 frames, and keep sort of splitting the difference until you've got, one keyframe on every frame. Just think back to the golden rules right in exercise 1. You're an artist, you're an animator. Think like one. Look where the keyframes should be. look for the points of movement, the natural points of movement where things start and stop. Instead of adding a whole host of keyframes, can you come in and use an ease in or ease out? If you can't, remember to change those back to linear keyframes. You know, all of this sort of leads into to my number 7, which is about adding the smallest number of keyframes necessary. And I don't say this just to be lazy, but actually, if you get to a stage where you're trying to sort of figure out where things aren't quite going wrong, and you've got hundreds and hundreds of keyframes here, you know, it actually can get very overwhelming, and you know, you're more likely to have to start from scratch if you've got hundreds of keyframes that you can't keep track of than a few sort of nicely well placed keyframes that you just need to tweak. Which moves on to number 8, which is don't be afraid to trash your work. Don't be afraid to delete keyframes, don't be afraid to delete whole shapes, and really don't be afraid to delete tracking data. If the tracking data is bouncing about and causing you more hassle than it's actually worth, get rid of it. Either retrack it from another point, or using some of the pre-processing techniques. But if it's still not working, you know, forget about it. Don't try and fight it. You know, you can have enough work to do on rotoring longer sequences, so it shouldn't feel like a slog. If you actually analyze things and work through that analysis, it should be a sort of rewarding experience to actually do it. You know, the rotoscoping can often be quite an arduous task, but it shouldn't feel like it's like you're battling against a shot. And if you do, see if you can rethink the approach that you've made. Number 9 is all about keeping shapes consistent. I think we've looked at that quite a lot. Let's come in here to this shot here with our mirror. You know, there's times where this mirror goes out of frame. See, quite a lot of times where this mirror goes out of frame, and these shapes also go out of frame here. But if we keep a generally consistent shape throughout, even when the object isn't on screen, that's going to help us when objects start coming back onto screen again. So we're not going to get some sort of weird shape popping in and out. And if we've got motion blur, it means that the motion blur is also going to stay consistent. That's not me telling you that when stuff goes out of frame, you've got to, you know, really, really think hard about where it would be and get that shape exactly right. You know, far from it. When things go out of screen, keep the rough shape going on and keep the shapes nice and consistent going on there. You know, even when they move behind other objects, still keep them vaguely the right shape. You know, just because if it pops out again from behind the object, you're going to be in a much better position to restart the animation. And my final point, number 10, is just be aware of motion blurred and out of focus elements, and use the tools that you have available to you for tackling those in a smart way. Motion blur can be much better off tackled using the motion blur node here, and then working through the shutter angle and the shutter phase that fits in with your image, usually the default 180 and -90. And out of focus elements can really be done quite efficiently using the feathering here. Remembering, of course, that your feather shapes don't have to match in any way the shapes that you used to construct the original object. Just to finish off, we're going to break down a couple of shots. Now, a lot of these shots we've seen before, so you know the breakdown is going to be fairly consistent with what we've done previously, though not always consistent, because obviously certain shots were showing certain parts of the application, which might not have been the absolute 100% best tool for the job here. So when analysing a shot, you know, I go through a little checklist in my mind, and the first thing is there camera movement, yes or no? How complex is that movement? Is it just a nice small controlled movement, say a small track or a small dolly, Or is it something a bit wilder, like a handheld shot that's just going on all over the place? And if there is camera movement, can it be tracked effectively? If not, are there any other objects that you're going to be taking out that can be tracked effectively? And after that, you know, just think to yourself, do you actually need to do roto work? After that, think to yourself, what exactly it is you need to roto, and how detailed you need to be with it. Because, you know, a lot of times if something's either quite small or in motion, you may not have to be as accurate with it if it's something that's very, very still and staying on screen for quite a long time. And can we, for example, come in and use keying to actually pull out the details that we want? If not the whole thing, there may be enough that we don't have to manually roto everything. One little thing I want to show you on this one, in something we haven't looked at before. This is the concept of open shapes, and this is perfect for these kind of things here. I'm just going to draw a quick Bezier spline. Here, and then hit escape. And this is going to give us a Bezier spline here. I'm going to call this feeler, or feeler 1. And we've got a little stroke width down here for open shapes. So if I turn that on, our overlay on there, I can then come in and just stroke this shape here. And we've got an open shape that is now describing this feeler. And this can be, there we go. This can actually be animated in exactly the same way as a regular shape here. The only thing to be aware of is that if you wanted to export out shapes, certain of the export functions here don't accept open shapes. So, for example, we couldn't export out this shape to anything other than a silhouette shape. Whereas a closed shape, as closed circle, we can export out pretty much everything. One of the things that can be the most complex to work out is the complexity of the articulation of limbs, and how you deal with those. What's the smallest number of shapes that we can do to break up limbs? And remember, we're always talking about simple shapes. We're not talking about big complex shapes, because those are going to be a nightmare to keep in control. Clothes as well. Are we having to take out clothes? And if we are those clothes rigid and therefore a lot simpler to take out, or are they in motion? So we have the fluid flowing dress here or skirt here. So what we'd have to do is we'd have to figure out how we're going to break this skirt up, and we're going to do that by looking at the movement of the individual parts, because the flowing nature of the cloth here means that we can't just take this out again. We can't just take this out as one part, because not every part is moving in the same way. So this part here is moving in one way. Let's get our paint back up actually. So this part here is moving in one way, and this part here is moving differently to this part, this part, this part, and find a colour I haven't used a million times before. Can't do it. And that part there. So we'd have to break these up into different sorts of areas. And in fact, when this leg comes in, we've got a whole new section we couldn't see before. So, I mean, it's really important that we start with the most complex part of any given object and then work our way through there. Great. Well, I think that's it for now. Thank you very much for joining me on this course. I really hope you found it useful. I do enjoy getting emails and comments from you. So if you do have questions about what we've seen here, or if you've got suggestions for new tutorials or extra tutorials regarding some of the functions that you maybe didn't go over in as much detail, then please just let me know. Just go to curiousturtle.com and send us a mail. My name's Ben Brownlee. Thanks for being with me, and I'll see you again soon. Bye now.